Zeapon has just released the latest slider. This time it is the Micro4. This is the successor to the really popular Zeapon Micro3. And while the Micro4 may be quite similar to the Micro3 in a lot of areas, but there are also some pretty big changes and new features that will really change how you would use the slider. So in this video, I'm going to show you all the new changes. But before we start, I want to let you know that I'm an ambassador for Zeapon. So I'm not going to call this video a review. Instead, it's more like a product overview. But I will also share with you my genuine thoughts about this slider. I just hope this video can help you make your decision if you are thinking of buying a new slider. The Zeapon Micro4 can either be a manual slider or a motorized slider. And it is really easy to convert it between a manual and a motorized slider. But let's talk about the manual slider first. The design of the manual Micro4 slider is very similar to the Micro3. It is mostly made of metal, it feels very solid, and it is a lot more sophisticated than the Micro2. The Zeapon Micro4 comes in 3 different sizes. The one that I have here is the shortest 500 series. The length of this slider is 379mm, so it is a pretty compact slider. And then we have the 700 series that the physical length is 469mm. And then the longest one is the 1000 series, which is 619mm long. One thing that makes the Zeapon Micro series sliders very famous is its double distance design. What it means is, for example, this 500 series slider, the physical length is only 379mm, but the total travel distance is 590mm. So it is much longer than the actual physical length of the slider. This is because, as you see, when you move the slider, there is the top layer that connects to the camera that will move, and then there is the lower layer that also moves. So together, it is traveling 2 times the distance compared to a normal slider. Because of this, this slider is a lot more compact than a lot of its competitors, but can still provide similar travel distance. The compact size is great for someone like me who don't have a large studio, or when traveling, it's much easier to bring a small slider. The slider has a V-shaped design, so each side of the track is 45-degree angle. According to Zeapon, this design makes the track more stable and also increase the maximum load capacity of the slider. I'll talk about the load capacity a little bit later on. To keep the track stable even when it's fully extended, there are some supporting wheels hidden underneath at each end of the track. The Micro4 can either be used on a flat surface directly, for example, you can just put it on your desk, or you can mount it on a tripod. If you want to use the slider without any tripod, you just need to extend the 4 legs so the slider can sit nicely on a flat surface. So you can put it on your desk or even put it on your floor and get some really low angle shot. For myself, I usually use the sliders for product shots or sometimes add a bit of movement when I'm shooting some talking head video. So I would usually mount the slider on a tripod. If you look at the bottom of the slider, you can see there are 3 mounting screw holes there. I usually use the center screw hole to mount the slider on my tripod. If you want the most stable setup, then you can use 2 tripods, each mount to each end of the slider. This would be the most stable setup, but having to bring and set up 2 tripods is quite troublesome. So each of the Micro4 slider comes with 2 supporting rods that you can attach to each end of the slider and then attach it to your tripod. This way you can create a 3-point connection, so even if you are just using a single tripod, it is still a pretty stable setup. With the smallest 500 series slider, if your camera is not too heavy, you may be okay to use it without any of the supporting rods if your tripod itself is strong enough. However, if your camera is heavy, your tripod itself would most likely still bend a little bit, so that would cause the whole slider to tilt a bit when the slider is fully extended. And if you're using the longer 700 or the 1000 series sliders, then I would highly recommend you to use the supporting rods if you are using a single tripod. The screw on the slider for you to mount the camera can be easily changed between 3/8 inch and 1/4 inch without having to use any adapter. You can also hide the whole screw completely inside the slider by just press it down and rotate it a little bit. This makes it easier if you want to put your slider in your normal camera bag without the gears when you are traveling, so you won't have a screw that is poking out from the slider. But since the Zeapon Micro4 also comes with a carry case, I would recommend you to use the carry case to transport your slider, as it does protect the slider much better compared to a normal camera bag. One thing that I was really surprised and impressed when I tried the Micro 2 the first time a couple of years ago was how smooth the slider is. And I'm talking about the manual Micro 2 itself, so that's the one without the motor. Look at this sample video that I shot when I just manually move the slider. The slider starts and stops very smoothly, and the movement is also very fluid. And the good thing with a manual slider is that because it is completely manual, so you can just control the speed, the acceleration easily, anytime, without changing any settings or press any buttons. Actually, there is a setting that you can change on the manual Micro4 slider. There is a knob here for you to adjust the resistance of the slider. It is a stepless control. 1 means the least amount of resistance, 3 is the opposite. To be honest, the difference between 1 and 3 setting is a bit more subtle than I thought it would be. However, if I angle the slider, so one end of the slider is lower than the other end, then I can use the different setting to adjust how fast the camera on the slider will move by gravity. There is also a lock switch for you to lock the slider completely, and you can lock the slider at any position. These two things are not completely new. The Micro 3 slider also has them, but the design is a bit different on the Micro 4. And this new dial and the lock design is the major difference between the Micro 3 and the Micro 4 manual slider. Other than that, the rest of the Micro 4 slider is almost exactly the same as the Micro 3, and that is not a bad thing, and I'll explain why very soon. So this is pretty much everything about the Micro 4 manual slider. There isn't much that you need to adjust. It is very simple to use. Once you tried it yourself, you will really love how smooth this slider is. Now let's talk about the motorized version of the Micro 4 slider. The motorized version Micro 4 is the real upgrade if you compare the Micro 4 to the Micro 3. The majority of the new features and changes are on the motorized module. To convert the manual Micro 4 to the motorized Micro 4 is super easy. You just need to mount the motorized module onto the slider and tighten up the 2 screws. It's just a 5 seconds process. To convert the motorized slider back to a manual slider is also very easy because you just need to do the exact opposite thing. And what it means is you can also just buy the cheaper manual version of the Micro 4 slider first, and then later on decide if you want to upgrade to the motorized version or not. You can just buy the motorized module when you want to do that. And remember, I just said the Micro 4 slider is almost identical to the Micro 3 is actually a good thing. It's because if you already have a Micro 3 slider, you just need to buy this new Micro 4 motorized module, and then you can upgrade your Micro 3 slider into virtually a Micro 4 slider. And this is because the Micro 4 slider is pretty much the same as the Micro 3. and that would turn your Micro 3 slider into virtually a Micro 4 slider, and then you can enjoy all the new features that I'm going to talk about next. If you look at the new motorized module, there's now a big color screen on the top. All the buttons and controls are also now at the top. So this is different to the previous Micro 2 and Micro 3 that doesn't have a screen, and also all the buttons are on the side. I'm not too sure if it was intentional, but I found having the display and all the controls at the top makes the slider much easier to use. Unlike the Micro 2 or Micro 3, I no longer have to position the slider so all the buttons are facing me, so I can see and press the buttons easily. So now no matter which way the Micro 4 slider is facing, I can still see the screen and the buttons, and I can press them easily. While the Micro 4 is not the first Zeapon slider that has a color screen, the Zeapon Access slider also has a color screen. The screen on the Micro 4 is not only quite a bit bigger and easier to see, it is also a touch screen. So that simplifies the control of the slider quite a bit. While it still has the physical buttons for powering on the unit and also move the slider left or right, pretty much everything else like setting the AB point or the menu system can be controlled just using the touch screen. Compared to the Zeapon Access, there are a lot less buttons, and that really modernized the control interface a lot. There are 3 new physical controls on the unit. First one is a speed adjustment dial. If you have watched my Micro 3 video, you may remember one thing that I didn't like is that even when you set the slider to the slowest setting on the motorized module itself, it is still a little bit too fast for what I do. While I could use the Zeapon Lab app to make the speed slower, I myself generally don't like to use the smartphone app because, well, it takes time to find and launch the app, and then I have to connect the slider to the phone, etc. So it's just a bit of pain if I have to use the app. But now, with the Micro 4, there's a dial for you to adjust the velocity between 1 to 100% in 1% increment. So this is much better than the previous Zeapon Micro slider that only has 3 speed settings on the slider itself. I've compared the Micro 4 with the Micro 3. It seems 35% speed with the Micro 4 is roughly the same as the slow speed setting on the Micro 3. 69% is the same as Micro 3's medium speed, and 100% is the same as the fast speed setting on the Micro 3. It means I can easily make the Micro 4 goes slower, and I can also fine-tune the speed easily to exactly what I want. And when you change the speed using the dial, the changes will be applied immediately even when the slider is already moving. So it means you can ramp up or down the slider speed manually in real time if you want. But wait, there is more. The second new control is the normal high speed switch. So if you flick the switch from normal to high speed setting, the slider would now travel a lot quicker. So with the normal speed setting, 1% is 0.18 mm per second, 100% speed is 40 mm per second. With the high speed setting, 1% is the same as 100% normal speed setting, so it's also 40 mm per second, but you can increase the speed all the way to 178 mm per second at 100% setting. It is really fast. At the fastest speed setting, it takes just around 3 seconds for the 500 series slider to travel from one end to the other end. So if you want to use the Micro 4 at the fastest speed setting, the longer 700 or the 1000 series slider will be more beneficial. Here is a comparison of the slider running at different speed. This video is playback at normal speed. You can see the big difference in speed from the slowest to the fastest speed setting. One of the biggest challenge for a motorized slider is When you are shooting close-up or macro scene, if the slider is not perfectly smooth, you can easily see that in the footage that you shot. You can see the jitter, vibration, or the irregular speed. But with this Zeapon Micro4, it seems to be very smooth. Look at this scene I shot with my GH6 using the Olympus 60mm macro lens at 1:1 macro ratio. I set the slider to the slowest setting 1%, which actually can be pretty tricky for a lot of slider. But the footage that I got, I think is still very smooth, so that is pretty impressive. There are a few limitations about the high speed setting that I want to mention. First, you cannot change between normal and high speed when the slider is moving. You can only do that when the slider is not moving. Secondly, the high speed setting would affect the maximum load capacity of the slider. With normal speed setting, the maximum load capacity is 12 kg when the slider is traveling horizontally, or 4.5 kg at vertical direction. At high speed setting, the horizontal load capacity is still the same at 12 kg, but vertically it is now only 2 kg, so that is less than half of the normal speed setting maximum capacity. It is a trade-off between torque and speed. And one more thing is, at the normal speed setting, the slider's motor is extremely quiet, almost silent, even at 100% speed. It's easily the most quiet motorized slider that I've ever used. But if you change to high speed setting, the motor would now generate a lot more noise. I still won't call it noisy, but it certainly is not silent. So if you are filming in a quiet place and you need the slider to be very quiet, then you may have to stick with the normal speed setting. And then there is the third new control, which is the hand button. By pressing that button, you can turn the slider into manual mode, which means you can now manually push the slider pretty much just like you don't have the motorized module installed. We have the Pons PT motorized pen head and the time-lapse trigger that you can buy separately and add to the Micro4 slider. I've already covered all these accessories in a previous video, so I'm not going to go through all of them again in this video. I put a link to my previous video in the video description below. But basically, the Pons PT pen head allows you to turn the slider from a one-axis slider that only go left and right into a three-axis slider with the additional pan and tilt movement. The time-lapse trigger will allow you to take time-lapse photos with better exposure control. These are all optional accessories that you need to purchase separately, or you can buy one of the Micro4 Pons kit, which would come with the Pons PT pen head. In order to use these accessories, you need to first link them to your slider, and you can directly do it on the slider by going into the menu system and pair them. And once you did it once, the Micro4 can remember these additional accessories, and it can help you to connect to these additional accessories next time you turn on the Micro4 again. So once they're all paired and connected, then you can control each of them separately and set AB port and play it back the same way. One thing that I do wish the Micro4 can do is allow us to control everything from the slider itself. Right now, we do have to control the pen heads from the pen head itself, which is okay, but I thought it would be a lot more convenient if I can control everything from just the buttons and touch screen on the slider. I think I've made a similar comment in my Zeapon access video as well. But apart from this minor complaint, everything works pretty much exactly as I expected. Now on the slider itself, you can only set the start and end point of the movement, no matter it's just a slider or slider with the pen heads. So that's what we usually call the AB point. If you want to have more than just 2 waypoints, then you can use the smartphone app Zeapon Lab to set up to 6 waypoints. You can then play it, and the system will then go through each of the 6 waypoints that you set. You can also get it to loop forever between all the different waypoints. However, one thing that may be a bit of issue for some of you is that when it's playing back the waypoints, there is always a bit of pause between 2 waypoints, as the system would always slow down and stop everything when it reaches a waypoint, and there isn't a way to skip the pause. I would love to have an option that the system would just transit from the previous waypoint speed and movement to the next one without the pause. If you're not familiar with the Zeapon Lab app, there are quite a few different features available on the app. But once again, since I already covered that in one of my previous videos, so I'm not going to repeat it again in this video. You can find the link to my previous video in the video description below. You can either use a NPF style battery or a USB PD power source to power the Motorized Micro4. In terms of battery life, I was a bit worried about the battery runtime because of the new color touch screen, but I look at the official figures and it actually looks pretty good. Now, the official figure is when the slider doesn't have a camera attached to it, so the actual runtime when you have a camera mounted on the slider would surely be lower. But I have been using the slider for about 3 weeks now, and I have been using the same MPF 750 battery, and I still haven't need to recharge the battery yet, so the battery life seems to be pretty good. I remember when I first saw the Zeapon Micro4, I thought, wow, it looks really cool. I really like the design. I can't believe that was more than 2 years ago. As I said before, the Micro4's main upgrade is the Motorized module. We have the new color touch screen, the new buttons layout. Altogether, it makes using the Micro4 really different to the Micro3. The Micro4 feels a lot more sophisticated, but at the same time, it is easier to use. The new speed control dial, together with the new normal high-speed mode switch, make the slider just a lot more versatile. No matter you want the slider to move slowly or very quickly, you can do that with the Micro4. But what I really like with all these changes is that I really can do almost everything on the slider itself without having to use the app. I've stopped using my Micro3 slider a while ago and switched to the Zeapon Access slider, or even go back to the Micro2 slider, because with the Micro3, even with the slowest speed setting, it's still a little bit too fast for me when I'm shooting my product shots. While I could use the Zeapon Lab app to make the Micro3 go a little bit slower, but I just don't really want to having to use the app every time I use the slider. But this time, since I can easily adjust the speed from the Micro4 slider directly, I would definitely be using the Micro4 slider myself from now on. I really like Zeapon Micro slider's compact double distance design, and Micro4's new user interface just makes the whole workflow a lot easier and quicker. At the moment, I really don't have a need to use the high-speed mode setting myself, but who knows, now I have this available, maybe I can think of some way to use this new feature for some of my future projects.